Hi, I'm Torte de Lini. Let's talk about the new 7.37b patch update. Long overdue. I think anybody who's playing against, let's say, Ember Spirit or Tinker or these annoying snowball lineups like Underlord and Sven was probably waiting for this long overdue update and hopefully balance change for this patch. Here are 15 things or 15 changes you need to know about 7.37b. All right, coming at number 1, Ember Spirit is finally nerfed. I don't know what took Valve so long, as the hero was strong at all points of the game. His laning stage was a guaranteed win for him thanks to the double impact facet and splitting flame guard damage with his new innate ability, Immolation. May have seemed like a good idea as a nerf since Immolation damage scales with Fire Remnant, of which Ember Spirit doesn't level it up until everything else. But honestly, that wasn't enough. Now we see some real change with Sleight of Fist having a higher cooldown, late game Immolation dealing much less damage, and his level 10 and level 20 talents are weaker in values. I still honestly don't think this is enough just because the hero itself is very strong and a lot of his items are still relatively good, like Glipnir, Shiva's Guard, and Mage Slayer, and the hero itself just has a lot to offer with a very safe ganking tools by his side from the mid game onward. Okay, number 2, Tinker was way strong as it sat on a 57% win rate without breaking a sweat. Essentially, the big issue was that the hero just outright overhealed his entire team while dealing huge AoE damage that cannot be avoided or stopped non-stop. It made the Death Ball meta even more potent for coordinated teams and effectively diminished a lot of other heroes that typically relied on being able to stay consistently in or around the fight. Slark, Ursa, I don't know, Lifestealer. I mean, these are just some heroes that I had in my head. Items like Holy Locket and Guardian Greaves really took advantage of his Eureka innate ability, where Tinker would not only be able to amplify his healing even more, but the lower cooldown meant the debuff from Guardian Greaves, basically called Mend, would also be so much shorter, and thus Tinker was the only hero who could use Guardian Greaves practically twice in a fight because the cooldown was so low. This combined with his defense matrix spell and farming stack jungle camps comfortably with March of the Machines meant you had basically a super pause 5 hero with pause 3 itemization and farmed gold. Okay, number 3, Ursa's innate ability, Maul, was one of the reasons the hero that was basically so good. His laning stage was basically cured of all issues by giving Ursa effectively 11 damage right from the start of the game. It made competing against Ursa for denies and last hits impossible for a good portion of enemy offlaners, and that extra damage really hurt if Ursa was paired with, let's say, a Venomancer as a pause 5 to help him set up kills. The level 15 and 20 talent are to help curb down his damage scaling because once he had a good laning start, which he usually did, he would basically be ahead of most players in terms of damage when he came online. Cool. Number 4, Primal Beast is a very popular mid laner and off laner, and it is no surprise he's been nerfed. The Romp and Stomp facet was giving kind of insane movement speed, which was amped up by Primal Beast players buying a Windlace right after phase boost for even more damage output through Trample. Now only works when activated, which makes it a bit more equal in application, as let's say his other facet, Ferocity, which only works when you use Pulverize. I'd still go with the Romp and Stomp regardless though, and 10% is nothing to sneeze at. It just makes maneuvering around with Primal much slower and more taxing to do when you leave your mid lane. Number 5, Lina Thermal Runaway Facet now scales with levels in Laguna Blade. This is just a scaling adjustment in line with the fact that Lina's new innate ability, Combustion, can reach its threshold of 150 damage pretty early, and so stacks of Fiery Soul meant you were pumping serious damage into enemies without even needing any real items besides a Maelstrom. This is kind of a no-brainer. Number 6, Venomancer's nerf with Septic Shock is an adjustment to the hero having, unintentional overpoweredness, where he was doing massive damage with items like Shiva's Guard, that gave him basically 2 debuffs, or 3 debuffs, I should say. You also got 2 debuffs from his ultimate ability and 2 from his Poison Sting, 1 from his Plague Ward and 1 from him. So your damage output, or base bonus damage you would get from having all those debuffs on an enemy, was just absolutely astronomical. It pretty much insta-killed anyone for 2,000-3,000 damage. Now it makes a bit more sense, and I think we all can breathe a little easy that Venomancer is not plaguing our games, pun intended. Number 7, similar to Venomancer, Viper's Predator innate ability was also giving too much damage, and it was the main reason people were buying Manta Style on him. It gave both movement speed and dispel, which he needs, as well as extra damage that made him a bit too strong. Basically, his talent changes are also nice in that they provide him with a bit more mid-game scaling and damage when he's typically itemizing to ensure he can actually deal the damage. So just a nice change where they're giving him some damage through talents, but also nerfing an unintentional damage spike timing that he got with Manta Style. Number 8, Venomancer. He has a new innate ability that kind of didn't hit the mark, as the hero sits on a 33% win rate in 7.37. His early game and build up to Ag Scepter was massively slowed when they took away his early level in Phantom Rush for this new innate ability that was kind of an attempt to alleviate his late game lack of damage compared to a lot of other popular meta heroes. So as you can see, they bumped his illusory armaments from 65 to 100% for Venomancer himself, but the illusions still only get 65%. I'm honestly not sure that'll be enough because his early game is still lackluster, especially in the meta where Aura is popular, like Crimson Guard, Pipe, and Greaves, while Glipnir still cancels out Venomancer alongside a lot of great AoE heroes like Underlord, Ember Spirit, Sven, and Primal Beast. Centaur Warrunner, the horsepower movement speed increased based on strength, nerfed. I think I have an old video about this on my main channel or my previous channel. Basically, they nerfed it because Centaur players were pretty much just buying straight up 3 bracers and no boots. And since the bracer change in 7.37, where it no longer gives you damage but purely health, that meant that Centaur was just unkillable in the lane, had insane regen and incredibly scaling damage with his retaliate to easily take camps and just sit his fat horse's ass in the lane. With the popularity of Pipe and Crimson Guard, the hero was basically a tank, an unkillable tank all game with decent movement speed. Almost the same as he got a phase boots, probably a little bit less, but at a certain point he scales with enough strength. And then combined with the blink dagger and his ultimate, he was just basically all over the map, dealing tons of damage and retaliating any damage back. Cool. Let's talk about number 10, Enchantress. The Spellbound facet has been buffed to have its attack range return. It was previously taken away. Now it's come back. I think they made a huge mistake by taking it away. Great for a lot of pro game drafts where we see Enchantress picked up as a good early game ganker and lane dominator with her enchant ability. As of 7.7, people were honestly picking the overprotective wisps and stacking bracers, but we might see people come back to Spellbound thanks to this change. Fingers crossed. Number 11, Quathwex, Exhort, and Invoke can now all be cast with Invoker when invisible, which I think is just a nice user experience adjustment to allow you to go invisible as a way to detach yourself from enemies or even position for a gank and invoke the right abilities you have within your invisibility duration, rather than, either having one of your invoke spells ready and then going invisible, or preparing to double invoke all your spells into the combo, knowing that preparing for it will break your invisibility. So honestly, just a nice change for a hero that's kind of fallen to the wayside in recent patches. I don't think people are really going to notice this change until Invoker is a bit more popular. With the rise of Mars, maybe Invoker will come back for sure. I do think Invoke itself should break invisibility, but we'll see if this change really matters whatsoever. So actually, Muerta has actually, our number 12, Muerta has actually come back into the fold with the Ofrenda change, now giving her attack speed when she is nearby. That's a 7.37 change. So her damage output actually in the mid game is now achievable with Glipnir and Ofrenda, rather than needing, let's say, a Mjolnir, which hasn't been a thing for a while, and having to farm that item, which was much harder than Glipnir, despite being relatively the same cost. They adjusted the Ofrenda's attack speed to be scaling with levels, so it's weaker before your ultimate and a much stronger late game, as to align with how Muerta's power timings usually are, which is usually late game. Number 13, this was going to be in my top 5 mid laners video, but basically Puck was climbing the charts as a viable mid laner because they come online pretty fast. Great all-around ultimate and having amazing scaling damage, since they're like top 5 or 6 in terms of base intelligence and top 3 in scaling intelligence. So items like Witchblade and Parasma were must buys, just because the damage you would deal with that item was pretty massive. The Puckish change here is actually pretty important because Yules is still very prevalent on the hero, but they were getting practically a huge percentage back in terms of mana from the Puckish innate ability, just for avoiding an attack, and getting 4 times that amount if they dodged a spell as early as 7.36b. And that was not just with phase shift, that was anything that helped them in disjoint. So you can imagine how Puck basically never ran out of mana, had low cooldown spells, leading to this kind of endless barrage of damage from this teeny tiny thing. So I'm glad they nerfed Puckish, just because, especially with the rest of Parasma, Puck had essentially infinite mana and thus infinite spell damage output. So number 14 is Zeus. Maybe I'm a big Zeus player, but maybe somebody can give their perspective about these talent changes. I'm not quite sure what to make of Zeus changes. I honestly like it a lot, the idea of earlier damage from his talents and an increase in his mana regen. So you can maybe skip items like Aether Lens or I don't know, Kaya. Honestly, I would keep getting Kaya Especially if Zeus doesn't really need the extra range or lower mana cost. But on the flip side, you lose a lot of great maneuverability without his old talents. So I'm curious to see if this is going to work, if this is going to make Zeus come back a little bit back into the fold here. Honestly, a lot of mid laners that are popular right now are just kind of dunk on Zeus. Lina, even Shadow Fiend's not that popular, but Shadow Fiend, Ember Spirit, Puck, these heroes just are 100% okay against versus Zeus. So probably not enough of a change to warrant making the list, but I wanted to round it out to an even 15. Speaking of rounding out to an even 15, the Witch Doctor Cleft Death Facet are nice, but not all that appealing because Voodoo Festration is still pretty good. They're effectively trying to make Cleft Death less of a trade-off when using your ultimate and have it scale in view of its secondary target, but it's honestly contrary to how Witch Doctor is played in the early game or his abilities in the late game. You're not really using Death Ward early on to hit to hit 2 targets. You're really focusing on 1, so you want that damage to be as high as possible. Whereas, later on hitting 2 targets with Death Ward, it's not really a focus for Witch Doctor. If he goes that late into the game, he probably just wants to just get an axe up there and hit all his targets, so to speak. So I'm a little conflicted about Cleft Death, so to speak. I like the name, and that's pretty much it.